What do you fight about?
Everything.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, how I load the dishwasher, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I can't put enough things in that dishwasher.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. Hey, today we have got Gabe and Rebekah Lyons. You ever fought in your relationship? You ever fight in your marriage? Come on, everybody has. What happens when couples fight about everything? Gabe and Rebekah Lyons open up about marriage, sex, and they have honest advice for two career couples. Hey, today, here's what we're doing. 5 lucky winners are going to get a copy of Gabe and Rebekah's new book, The Fight for Us. To enter, just leave a comment saying, I love my marriage. The winners are going to be announced on YouTube. So right now in the comments, drop down, I love my marriage. You'll be entered to win. And of course, like, subscribe, leave a comment to join the conversation. And now a word from today's partners. Then we'll dive right into my interview with Gabe and Rebekah Lyons, recorded in Nashville. This episode is brought to you by The Art of Preaching. Hey, preachers, listen up. If you want to take a big step forward in your preaching this summer, I'm offering something for the very first time to make sure that happens. So until April 11th, I'm offering a preaching breakthrough guarantee with my course, The Art of Preaching. In the course, you're going to get equipped to deliver more engaging, memorable, and impactful messages every single time you preach. I'm going to help you do that this summer. Because I don't know about you, but for me, summer's the time to work on stuff. What if you worked on your preaching this summer? So in the entire preaching process, I cover it all from prep to delivery, so your sermons really connect with your audience and spark life change. So I've made it easier than ever for you to leap into the course. And here's how the Preaching Breakthrough Guarantee works. Step 1, sign up for the Art of Preaching before the end of the day on April 11th. Step 2, go through the entire course, apply what you've learned. You've got time. Step 3, if you don't see a difference in your preaching, just email me by August 31st. You will get a complete and immediate refund. That's right. No questions asked. You can do the entire course, put it to work. If it doesn't improve your preaching by August 31st, 100% of your money back, and you've got the entire summer to do this. Now, the only catch, if you want to even call it that, is you actually have to go through the course, because if you do, I'm confident you're going to see a difference. So don't wait. This guarantee disappears April 11th. Go to theartofpreachingcourse.com to register and start delivering messages that really connect. Again, that's artofpreachingcourse.com, or click the link in the description of this episode wherever you're tuning in from. This episode is brought to you by Subsplash. Facebook dropped a big policy change recently. They will now delete all live stream recordings after 30 days. And guess what that means? Churches are at risk of losing their entire media library if they only rely on Facebook Live. That's why having church-focused, high-quality media tools and libraries is so important. And that is what Subsplash's media and live streaming gives to you. From Subsplash's live stream dashboard, you can broadcast your content, engage your community through a live chat, and grow generosity with real-time giving interactions, all in one place. And after your live stream ends, Subsplash's one-click publishing allows you to upload your media to a single dashboard and watch it update instantly across all of your digital channels, maximizing your church's reach and freeing up hours of time for your team every week. So go to subsplash.com/carey to schedule a quick, no-obligation demo and save $500 when you sign up. That's subsplash.com/carey. You'll save $500 when you sign up. So Gabe and Rebekah, welcome back to the podcast. It's good to have you guys. Nice to be here in person in Nashville.
I love it.
Franklin.
I know.
To be
Franklin.
specific.
To
Thanks
be
for
very
hosting us.
specific.
To be very specific. 4th Street in Franklin. But anyway, it's good to be with you. So I've been excited to have this conversation for a number of different reasons, but one of which is this dynamic which seems to be growing in ministry couples. You not only love each other, you work together, and you've worked together for a long time. Can you talk about that dynamic in marriage as the two of you work together on Think and other projects?
Well, it's lots of highs and lows. The highs are you get to spend more time together. Maybe if we were in different careers, our life has mapped out in a way that we overlap so much in the two different ways that we do ministry. So you enjoy those things. You get to travel together sometimes, all of that. But the downsides are it's really hard to shut off the conversations that are work-related.
Absolutely.
So you find yourself at dinner or a date night, and
Or going to bed, and Gabe is like, no more talk about budget or money or...
Yeah, I've got other things on my mind when we're going to bed.
When we're going to bed.
Sex is one of them.
Exactly, yeah, one of them.
And, some topic comes up about the podcast schedule and when are we doing that one, And so those kind of dynamics, I think, become the risk, is if you don't put good boundaries in place and start to set up some rules for how are we going to do this to give enough space for the work, but also give enough space for just us.
Well, and we didn't start strong working together, let's be honest. Like, we both had separate jobs, separate careers. We had babies. And then I slowly entered back in, and we launched what we do now. And I quit every other night because I was free help, in the launch of our nonprofit.
Undervalued
I know.
free
And
help.
I got all the jobs nobody wanted. And one of them was accounting, both of which I got C's. And so that was not my strength. And we had a lot of tension, and we'll get into this more, but it just felt like I can't do any of this right. And then we both felt stressed because it was new and fledgling. And like, are we even going to live in a van down by the river in 6 months? And so there was a lot of tension and stress early on where I was like, how do people do this? How do people love each other and still work together? So we tripped along the way, and we finally learned to celebrate each other's strengths and not try to like prove or impress or outdo one another. And that helped shift how we saw it working together, I think.
Is there one of you who really wants to turn off the work conversation independent of bedtime? And another one who's like, no, we really need to discuss this. Because I work with my wife and my youngest son now.
Yeah.
And when my youngest son's around and he's at our house or we're at his house, we do not talk about work at all. It's like preserved. But Tony and I, we're kind of like, we're like you guys as a married couple. We're just kind of in the ebb and flow, and it'll pop up at the weirdest times.
Yeah. It's pretty fluid for us too. I mean, it's not like we say, hey, at 5:00, no more conversation. But we've also created really good rhythms in our life that allow the space for those conversations to happen. And most of them are during a work day. They're not usually on the weekends. And because we've got some structure for that, as well as structure for her and I to have just playtime together, like recreation, or we go out and hike and we play pickleball or do a number of things, play golf. So we have a lot of that built in, and we're not talking about work when we're doing those things. So I think that's been part of how it's
found
worked.
its way. It definitely, I do think early on we would not know when the best way to do it. And now that even sleep, the older you get, sleep matters so much. I mean, it matters to everybody.
Matters a lot to me.
But when you're young, you kind of think, I'll sleep later in life. But for us now, starting our 50s, we are like, sleep is so imperative that we hush the house about an hour to prior, which means like no devices in our room, no like screens, and we are for sure not talking about a decision we have to make about work. So that has slowly entered our normal rhythm.
But it wasn't always like
couple
that.
Years.
I mean, to her point, it was not like that for years. So the couples that are walking through this dynamic, I think you learn the hard way. We've learned the hard way that when you bring up these work things, I mean, literally in your body, cortisol starts to surge. So if it's nighttime, you're trying to go to bed, and now you're laying in bed talking about some decision that might have a little stress
Do you have
connected
to fire
to it.
this person?
Yeah. You're like, we should sleep on this.
You're not going to sleep well, So there's some real health things that I think we've learned that there's good reason not to do this. It's not just for our relationship, but it's just not physically the right moments to be having these kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, you said something, and my wife, Tony, would totally resonate with you. I kind of wish he was here because he's like, oh, you got the jobs nobody else wants, and you have to do accounting.
Yeah.
So, Tony is responsible for receipts. So when I get back from a job, she'll take my receipts. Now, she's a lawyer and a pharmacist, a little overqualified for that job. That can often happen in a marriage where, one person sort of gets the leftovers and the other person is the CEO or the leader or the founder or whatever. How has that dynamic played out in your marriage? Because we're navigating that on a regular basis. She's happy to do it right now, most days. I don't want to speak for her when she's not in the room. And she'll be listening to this. Hi, hon. I love you. And we're really grateful, but that's stuff that has to be done. And we've looked at, we could outsource that, et cetera, but it's not worth the hassle.
Well, I think this is a bigger conversation in marriage that we do address in this conversation. I'm fighting for us, and especially the career conversation. So what we launched together as a nonprofit was largely dependent on Gabe. It was something he felt like was obedient to God. He felt the call, the mission. I helped kind of scribe some of the things coming out of him. I remember like championing and cheering for him, but I was birthing babies. Like that was my mission in that moment. And that was my full center. And he had his. And so I came alongside, but it wasn't like, yes, we are co-founders of Think Media, but But back then, that's what it looked like. Like we got to lean on each other. And it wasn't until about a decade after that we moved to New York City, and I developed panic disorder. I did not want to go, but we got there, and God in his mercy brought me out of that about a year and a half later. And then Gabe really encouraged me to write. And so over time, I just started to write about mental health in the church space and things like that. And he calls 2012 the year of Rebekah. And it was really this pause of going, okay, she's been running alongside me, and she's kind of been picking up the pieces wherever they are. Might not be in the center of her wheelhouse or her lane, but I actually want to turn the attention toward her and go, what could I do to come alongside her? And so we've kind of had these two vocational pursuits now under one roof. And what we have found even in our worlds, whether I'm a writer or speaker on mental health and faith, or he is this cultural guru on Christians on the front lines of arts, media, government, policy, education, you name it, there's still a concentric circle in the middle where we overlap and we pull out the best of each other, doing the thing that we both feel compelled to do.
Yeah, I think for husbands who've been in marriage for a decade or more, let's say, and they're kind of finding themselves in this season where this synergy is not happening because they're all out doing their thing and the wife's supporting, which happens traditionally, I think, in a lot of marriages, because in the church sometimes that's what we're told is supposed to be marriage. I grew deeply convicted to see Rebekah not using her gifts, not having space to use our gifts, because all the attention was to me using my gifts. And I think God just helped me see that if I could just come alongside and as a husband cultivate like the gifts that were there before we got married, before she started having babies. I mean, she's a gifted, professional, like great communicator, great leader. Like she grew up as a great leader in high school. She led her marching band. She was like the top drum major in the Southeast. You know, she's got the trophies to prove it. When I look back and realized that, and her life had started to almost dwindle into this little box that was being my wife, I realized God's got a calling on her life that's as important and probably more important than my life. But if I don't come alongside and help cultivate that, see it, believe in her, help guide however I can from my experience towards her starting to realize that herself, then I actually would be getting in the way of probably what God wanted to do. So that was where this 2012 year, 13 years ago, took place. And that became the beginning of her starting to develop her own voice, confidence. And then us try to approach that going, look, God's got a calling on both of our lives that doesn't cause us to sacrifice our children or leave home for it, or we need to both be working 60 hours a week and traveling all the time. But let's try to find a way together to sort through how are we going to do this. And that became our journey.
And now I think we're both sharper in our vocational pursuit, because I still lean on you in a lot of ways. You have this gift of faith that I need. And you lean on me in strategy sometimes, because that just comes a little more naturally for me. And we all have that bent in that birthright gifting from the womb. So let's harness that in one another. It doesn't mean you abdicate what you've been given or you do either, but it's going like, God put you together for a reason. He's put something in both of you that are uniquely formed for a reason. Catalyze that.
That's one of the reasons I really wanted to ask the question, when I look back on it, just to give a little more context to our situation. And I'm thinking about all the young couples who are watching this trying to go, okay, we've been married 3 years trying to figure this stuff out, or we're dating. So, Tony was a lawyer and a pharmacist. She was actually, when I started doing what I do now, when the company was born, so to speak, Tony was opening up a new chapter in her law practice, like a whole new job, new chapter of it. And then she so she wasn't involved at all. I was running it solo. I think of her as a founder because legally she was, but she was like busy, and our kids were still just finishing up being at home. And then, I had a year of Tony in 2021 where she released her first book. I came alongside her. I would travel with her to speaking events. It's like, I get to carry your bags. Right? Yeah. That kind of thing. And now she does our legal contracts and some of the back end work. Plus, still has her own ministry, coaching couples, speaking, leading retreats, etc.
I remember interviewing her and loved that book, and it was paramount for us. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so she also does the receipts because she's a good human being.
Yes, exactly.
It's about 3 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
But it's one of those things where you can default to that kind of thing. Any advice or principles or things to really watch for for young leaders who are sort of embarking on this phase where, yep, we're married and we're going to be working together / doing ministry together?
Well, recognizing there's seasons in life, that some seasons, like the receipt season right now, like we've had seasons where Rebekah was handling all the finances for our home because she had the attention towards it. Yeah. But then that shifted to me a few years ago. And so I took it on. So I don't know that any young couple should say this is always going to be what each of us does in terms of our roles in the home, our duties. I think I probably put away more dishes than Rebekah does right now.
Currently.
I do fold a lot of laundry.
I'm not even complaining.
But it's okay. I'm up earlier. Like, it's easy for me. Like, it doesn't stress me out. And so we've never had these roles that's like, oh, Rebekah has to do laundry and put it away. No, I can do that. I'm capable of doing it. I can be really productive. I can get 2 things done at once. So I just think I would caution couples not to fall into these traps of, this is what you do, this is what I do, this is how it's going to be.
We're very fluid in that too.
Yeah.
I do a lot of laundry. Tony does her share, but like that doesn't bother me. Yeah. And I enjoy doing it, that kind of thing. And at least for our generation, that was unique. It was sort of, you define the role, or, the men do outside, women do inside, that kind of thing. And we're already breaking those roles up.
That's what I would add to that, is just that this co-vocation launching is also co-parenting. I'm not called more to motherhood than he is to fatherhood. And then we also have a home that we share. And so because we both work, then we both come home a little earlier, and then we both co-parent, we both do stuff around the house. It does feel like there's a synergy we've had to learn with that, because we have 2 children with special needs that will be with us as empty nesters indefinitely, both 20, almost 25 and almost 12. So we understand, like, having kiddos with Down syndrome, like, it's the 4 of us, and we're going to have to figure out a rhythm of longevity that doesn't allow either of us to abdicate parenting or vocational obedience to God. So I think we do have a unique dynamic, but we were forced into it. And I do recommend this a lot. People always say, can you both have callings or careers or passions and be good parents? And it's the question, can you have it all, that they ask women all the time. Can you have it all? And I would say,
they never ask men that.
Yeah. But I would say you can, and you can have even like 2 callings under one roof, and you can do it successfully. But you can't do it all at the same time. And I think as long as we embrace the rhythm of it, and knowing, like, to everything there is a season, we slow a lot when the kids are home in the summers, in the winter month of December. So just knowing even our cadence is more accelerated certain months of the year than it is others. And because I write, I can plan things around that or teach. So it just requires some creativity.
And the principle to me is looking at one another and saying, I'm not better than you. Like, we each can humble ourselves and say, I just want to serve wherever I can pick up the help that's needed. And that means sometimes Rebekah's outside with me, helping me on some project outside that, like, normally I could maybe do it by myself, but she's like, what do you need help with? And I love that. And I'm trying to do the same for her. And I just think that's the general spirit that's been good in our marriage when we've had our best moments, is we're both just going, yeah, I'm fine jumping in. I'm not going to hold it against you. It's not a transaction. If I do this for you, you'll do this for me. And that's, I think, can happen a lot in marriage, especially younger marriage, is I'll do this for you, but you need to have sex with me because I did the dishes, right?
Now you owe me.
So it's
just collaborative. Yeah.
So working together is one thing. Writing a book on marriage is another.
Feels like a curse, doesn't it?
Yeah,
like, don't do it.
Yeah.
What were those dynamics like?
Oh, we were terrified. Anything you write, you must learn. And usually that's the topic that comes after you while you're writing. So we were very nervous about it. We've never co-written a book, and we've definitely never written a book on marriage. So this was a double whammy.
Yeah.
But God was really kind.
And I think for us, the conviction came because we've hosted retreats for over 20 years for couples. So we've done a lot of that together, but it's mostly just private conversations, coaching people through that. We've done a lot of marriage retreats these last 5 years. And we've seen the impact of unpacking our story and being really vulnerable about the journey we've been on. My deep kind of emotional health work that was required for her and I to experience intimacy and connection, her own work from her childhood traumas. And we realized that in talking about this and putting our story out on the table, the fight that we've had to have for our own relationship, this is empowering other people, and we need to keep moving with that. And the next step was let's try to articulate this in a way that we have 50 couples maybe come to our retreats, but we're never going to get through enough couples that way.
Yeah.
Maybe we could try to tell this story in a way that could just be useful for people. And I'll say it also is coming on the heels of a moment where it feels like the marriage conversation in the church, there's been a little bit of a loosening around, to me, covenant commitment and couples taking so seriously these covenants that are going to require you to fight for each other and to fight for this relationship and not to just escape when things get hard or when you realize you're fighting a lot, which we've fought a lot. And we tell
We're
a lot of
professional fighters.
we know how to fight. We've done it.
You're good at that.
Yeah.
And we still have fights. So
yeah.
I think removing some of that sense of people like it's abnormal that you're fighting. No, this is very normal that you are married to somebody who's very different than you, is going to hit you in ways that like just are so frustrating. And of course it'd be easier to just walk out the door and go self-actualize and do your own thing. And it feels like in our cultural moment, more and more people are finding those voices in their life that are saying, that's okay. Like, you should do that. That's going to be better for your health, your emotional health, your mental health. And we just think God's got a better plan for us in this, but it's going to require some hard work and getting into some things that aren't easy to talk about and work through. And we just want to encourage people and empower them that they can do that with God's help.
What do you fight about?
Everything.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, how I load the dishwasher, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
I can't put enough things in that dishwasher for Rebekah's
I'm
sake.
the maximizer that's so obnoxious. I was like, I don't want to unload that thing every day, but we're going to put like 3 or 4 days worth in one load that it breaks things. So we fight about how to cook a proper fried egg. We've fought about gardening. We have chickens and gardens and sourdough. We fight about weeds.
Directions. Like, even though there's a GPS that tells us the fastest way,
I'm like, well,
sometimes
my
that's still a
GPS says
discussion.
this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then more serious things. I mean, we fight about like, where should we live? What's the right home? What's the right environment for our kids?
How to parent. We fight about
money.
Helping versus doing for versus training. We fight about money, how much things cost. We fight about everything.
Fight about sex, like how frequently should we be having sex? And
or should we, if he wasn't kind?
Should we? I don't think that's never been a fight.
I just mean in that moment. Yeah.
Well, thanks for going there. Because you gave me a phrase a few years ago. I think it was a conversation we were having where you talked about a 10-year argument, and I may have borrowed that.
Yeah.
I think every couple that's been married for more than 10 years has a 10-year argument. What are a couple of your 10-year arguments?
Yeah, I would say it was in the first 10 years, he was working more and I was home more. And we fought about when he was coming home, for sure. And I did feel a lostness in that season because I always thought I would be a working mom, both inside and outside the home. And but because our oldest had a Down syndrome diagnosis, he was our 3rd year into marriage. We had our firstborn son with Cade with Down syndrome. Within about 10 months, he was up to 8 therapies a week for about 8 hours a week. And I just knew God just like, your team is knowing more than you on what's going on that you're trying to lead. Like, it's time to come home. So that just became a clear thing. Like, I loved motherhood. I loved those childhood years, those toddler and newborn years. But it was like we had 2, back to back to back, 3 total in that time. And I felt a little bit of like a swollen silence in the home. And I felt very lonely. I felt disconnected a little bit, partly because of the special needs lane of it and the delay of, development for Cade. And then he's running and hard charging. And I just was longing for intimacy and connection, but he would run out of words because men don't have as many as women anyways, but he would definitely run out by the time he got home. And so I would just say the fight was, I almost nagged him a lot. Like, why aren't you here more? Why aren't you more present? I just felt a little codependent in that season. And so I would pick things apart and, I think he felt the pressure from that.
Yeah. And I would say for me, and we talk about this a lot in our journey and in the book, was sex. It was, I don't think we're having sex enough. And like that conversation once every 6 months would come up.
Right.
And we'd resolve it. We'd talk through it. We'd process together, like, what are the dynamics? Like, what needs to change? And let me be very forthcoming. We write this again in the book, but we would have sex a couple times a week. It wasn't like we weren't having sex. It was more like I was a little more needy, I think, than was healthy for what it meant to me in our relationship, for us to have connection.
What did it mean to you?
To me, it meant that our marriage was good. if we were having a lot of sex. Like this was the one benchmark of she's
Where you
happy,
felt closest to.
I'm happy. Intimacy was being experienced. And it's just things I didn't know about myself really early in my journey up until this last decade, that I felt like sex was the signal that things are amazing with us.
Yeah.
Even if for her, they weren't amazing.
Yeah.
So she could be upset with you coming home, and you're like, well, as long as we have sex, then.
Oh, he
I've
would
kinda
definitely
won.
win me over.
Right.
He knew that we wouldn't go from a fight to sex. But it was more, I think your view of sex and mine was different. And we talk about this in the book. So sex, you can have this continuum from transaction to embrace. And so we invite the reader to go, where are you on that scale of 1 to 10? Is it transaction or is it embrace? And are you somewhere in the middle? And which of you is where? Because I think that's really important, because none of us come to marriage with a clean slate. We bring our origin story with us. My view of sex looked different than yours for a lot of different reasons. And I felt like a lot of sex was more transaction if it was all about what he needed. Right? Whereas, because men largely are vulnerable in sex, like that's their vulnerability. Like they need that physical connection and release so that they can feel secure and stable in the world. And women, we are more vulnerable emotionally. That's just true. Data shows this out. And so I need to feel heard. I need to feel seen. I need to feel like your attunement and you're present with me, so that I can feel connected to you. So you might feel connected to me in this physical union. I feel connected to you in this emotional union. Why are women more responsible for fulfilling that for men, but men don't feel the responsibility to fulfill that for women? And so we really had to kind of level the playing field and go, and so you have this need, and the Bible tells us to not ignore that need. But we're also talking about what about the wife's need and how to care and tend to her heart and cultivate that and nurture that in a way that this is a reciprocal relationship where both emotional, physical needs are being met through this communion and union. And so it took a long time.
Yeah. Well, what was happening was I didn't know how to meet her emotional needs.
Yeah.
I mean, so
let's unpack
I think
that.
a lot of husbands are stuck. Like their wife's like, I don't feel connected to you. Or like, I just want to have intimacy. And the husband's like, I'm doing my best, but it's not working. Like I don't
I
know
bought you
how
flowers.
to. Yeah, I don't quite know how to show up, and that was my story. I didn't know how to show up in the way that she needed it, and it took 20 years. I remember 20 years later, us having a conversation, and I'm in tears because I'm finally recognizing, like I had some sorrow, like biblical sorrow, realizing all that for 20 years she'd been walking through in the effort to connect with me, to help me, to meet needs, and my inability to show up in some ways that I was just discovering she needed. And
Can
that
you give me an example?
Yeah.
Spreadsheet. Tell that story.
She's whispering on the podcast. No, she's describing, I mean, I think for the aha for me was my counselor looking at me one day when we're having this conversation, and he's asking me these heart questions. I'm giving him my best answers, and he goes, Gabe, I feel like I'm talking to an Excel spreadsheet. He goes, like, you give me the answers, but it's so logic. Like, you're not, the head-heart connection's not happening. You're having a hard time processing anything other than just logic. And if you're doing that with Rebekah, then I understand what she's saying. Like, she doesn't feel like she knows your heart. And that was anxiety producing for me because I felt stuck. Like, I'm like, I don't know how to access that.
Yeah, you hadn't been there.
No.
So how can you give it to her?
So it took me on a deep journey into my childhood traumas. And this is, we're learning more about these journeys that people I think are becoming more aware of the mental health, emotional health.
Because you had an
journey.
incident when you were 12, right?
Yeah, when I was in a youth group, I had a youth pastor that really took advantage of my innocence in a way that I write about in the book more. But it was one of those where I'd built trust with a youth leader who was in his 30s. I'm 12. And he was a discipler. I mean, believed in me. I mean, that was all the appearances that were happening. But then there came a moment where he began to start talking about explicit things in ways that I was, as a young kid, unsure of what he was talking about. And he would invite more of these conversations and essentially was, I believe, grooming me because...
So he'd start talking about sexual things with you?
He'd talk about sex with his wife. He would talk about how sex happens. He wanted to answer any question I might have about sex. And, for a young child who's just hitting puberty, you're like, well, this is interesting. Like, I've not heard these things before. Thankfully, I was never physically assaulted or molested, but that experience for me actually taught me that I don't know that I can trust anybody because I had trusted this person as a spiritual mentor, disciple, or somebody I could talk to about future dreams and things. And then it all twisted and turned. And I
Because
realized
as a 12-year-old, there was a moment you're like, this is off. Like even he had
You knew that
he
at
had to
12.
figure that out there. Like just there was enough incidences where he's like, I'm not comfortable. And yet he never had anyone to process that with as an adult.
Yeah,
So what did you do?
I was able
Did
to
you
get out of
stuff
that.
it?
Yeah, I totally stuffed it. Felt shame for it
So
ever
you
occurring.
left, cut it off.
But carried that shame, the sense of sexuality being this vision that this guy had painted of what that was. And it made me look at sex in the wrong way, which is what we began to unpack. And I started to realize like my view of what sex ought to be had been completely distorted. And I'd cut off part of my heart. And I wasn't going to allow anybody else in because I didn't know who was safe anymore. And so that even meant Rebekah.
Yeah.
And
One
so-
thing your counselor said in that season as you were unpacking this, because you really didn't unpack it until much later, because we both knew about it. He told me when we were dating, and it was like, man, that is weird and inappropriate and awful. But until you have your own kid at 12, your own son, you don't really fully understand.
When
like,
you're
that was
processing that
horrible.
at 20, you
Right.
don't understand the way you do now.
And what your counselor said then, like, she can love you, but she can't have you. And it was this idea of like, there's a part of his heart that he doesn't even have access to, much less me. And it would take him even feeling the grief of like who you were at 12 and what you didn't have. You didn't have safety to even process that. Some people think like, well, didn't you have parents and didn't you have, a mom and dad? But you just don't know how deep these things go when like betrayal happens and loyalty is forged. And as a kid, you just are often told don't talk about it. And so you just have to harbor that alone. And I think that's why a lot of us in the church space especially are in trouble sexually as adults, because whatever we encountered as kids, because our parts work, was never explained in the purity culture about like just what God imagined for like a sexual union and husband and wife and how good that can be. And so it takes you tripping into that abstinence movement into marriage and then go, okay, how do we all of a sudden become like so free here? Because it's just not been approached that way at all in the church. And we
bad,
have
bad,
and
great.
we've had no one we can process this with that are mature, godly, loving adults that don't shame or condemn us. And I think
Was
that's
that your
really-
background, purity
Yeah, that
culture?
was mine. Well, it was abstinence, but never why. And it was definitely all about like the outside of the cup looking clean. So you had a lot of technical virgins, which what in the world does that even mean? And it was all about the physical act itself and less about the heart posture of like, why? Why does God call us into purity? Why does he love and delight in sex? Why are we so ashamed to even say the word out loud? It definitely took for both of us in a very legalistic, fundamental, independent Baptist background to come out of that. And it took us, and we write a lot about that in the book, because I do think if we can just get talking, we can get healing. And this is a topic that's important.
How long into your marriage did it take for you to really talk about the things that we're talking about right now, to even realize them and then start to process it?
Yeah, it was probably 17, 18 years into marriage.
So almost half your
So
marriage.
it's been
And by
it
that
was
point, a lot of people are divorced.
Right.
Right. A lot of people haven't made it.
Yeah.
Well, because by
17,
then,
18
I
years.
think it was like year 18 or 19. I remember we were watching a show. I was like, all of a sudden that got weird. I don't want to watch that. But then I got mad. And I'm like, why am I so mad? And I realized I had harbored a little bit of resentment about like having to show up and, just be more than I even felt whole and healed to do, because I wanted us to have connection and communion, but then also feeling this sense of duty or obligation attached to that, which robs freedom and intimacy and robs joy and delight. So I had to get mad first to recognize that I was resentful, to then go, what is up? Like, this isn't good. And thank God I think the mercy on our marriage was that we are just chronic oversharers and we like to fight. So we will just say the thing. We'll say the elephant in the room that we're ticked off about, whereas a lot of other marriages might go silent and those things never really get addressed.
I am that way. I will say it. And Tony is naturally more reserved. She's changed over the time, now that we're at a point where we can have a conversation. But thank you for sharing that, Rebekah. Gabe, there's a lot of guys who would never get to the point that they would say, oh yeah, I don't know how to do emotions. I don't know how to do intimacy. It's just like, I think I'll just watch some sports, go out hunting with the guys, and that's it. That's life, right? And then you die. what's the cost of never processing that and getting to the point where you really do realize, oh, I'm afraid of intimacy. I don't know how to share this. This episode is brought to you by Church.Tech. If you're not leaning into the world of AI and all the ways it can help your weekly workflow, you're missing out. So let me introduce you to Church.Tech AI, the latest innovation from our friends at Church.Tech. You probably heard of tools like ChatGPT or Claude, right? Well, imagine having that same AI power, but designed specifically for the church with faith-aligned guardrails to keep everything rooted in Christian beliefs. And here's the kicker. Church.Tech AI is completely customizable to your church. Add your mission and belief statements, and it adapts to create content for your church's unique voice. Imagine having an AI solution that aligns with your beliefs. But it doesn't stop there. It also gives you instant access to all your church's sermons. If you need to pull a quote from last year's Easter sermon, done. If you want inspiration from past sermon topics, you've got it, all in seconds. And guess what? It's an affordable tool. It's a fraction of the cost of other AI tools out there like ChatGPT, Claude, or others. So to claim it, go to Church.Tech and enter the promo code CAREY, C-A-R-E-Y, at checkout for 25% off for the first 3 months. You'll be glad you did. Just use the code CAREY at Church.Tech. You'll get 25% off for the first 3 months.
Yeah. Well, I think we miss out on knowing ultimately ourselves and all that's there that God from earliest years of life wanted to cultivate in us. And we cover it up and we distract ourselves. I call it the dopamine of distraction. Like we get our hits from sports. We get our hits from golf. I mean, I've got so many hobbies. I developed so many hobbies to keep myself distracted. I mean, and golf became my favorite. And it's not that we're not meant to enjoy these things. We do enjoy these things. I still love to play golf. But to start to recognize my obsession with watching football games or sports or hunting or fly fishing or all these hobbies became distractions from me going deeper into my heart and even giving the space and time to try to understand my story. Because it's hard. None of us wants to go back to that story. Like we've done a good job. I'd done a great job of shutting it all off and going, this isn't impacting me. Like I'm moving forward. Like I've shut this down. Why would I talk to a counselor about this? Yeah. Why would we drudge this stuff up? Because it's only negative. It makes me feel negative. I want to be positive. And that's really how it entered our marriage. Like I'm a positive person. Like we don't need to talk about this stuff. This stuff brings me down. But what I've learned is by being willing to go there, to start to understand that God gives us all these feelings as a gift, that like these hard feelings aren't really meant to be punishments to us. It doesn't mean we're doing something wrong. It's actually a gift for us to feel sadness, to feel grief, to feel fear, to feel these anxious feelings sometimes, because it leads us towards relationship. And that's what I started to learn is how to feel my feelings, talk about them with Rebekah, say them out loud, name them. That meant saying some hard things to Rebekah that she didn't want to hear either. And yet it forced some conversations in a safe place.
You don't have to get too specific. Like anger, things you resented her for or didn't like or...
Yeah, resentments. I mean, we had to go through great moments of just forgiveness and repentance with one another for things that had happened 15 years before that I hadn't realized how much it had hurt her. And then I had to come back and own it. And then I had to apologize. And then I had to say, I want to do better, but I'm going to need your help. Like, will you just help me? The next time, like, I say something like this, or you see me getting triggered, or you see me starting to go down this little rabbit hole that's, is unhealthy for me, like, I'm giving you permission to just help me pause. Yeah. And that didn't mean I wanted to hear the pause, or I didn't want to hear it from her at the moment, but that's the years of maturing, I think, in a relationship, is you start to get to know one another so well, you can help that person become the better version of who they can be and who they want to be, and they've told you they want to be, but they don't always know how because they're still building those connections.
And it's not just for the men. Let's just be honest. I mean, I did things that hurt him a lot. And I think when he found language to go, there was a season when I started writing and teaching and traveling that I was on social all the time and I was recording everything. And like, he's like, I hear more about you personally on Instagram than I do from you at home. I mean, there's some hard truths that were coming both directions. There was a lot of repentance going both ways. Marriages don't go sideways just because of one party. I think it definitely, there's this, we marry our emotional equivalent. And so
Say more about that. Because I've heard that. And so basically, is that like a level of emotional intelligence?
Yes.
You kind of marry someone around your same.
In fact, our one counselor, we've had a lot of counselors,
but
one counselor said, y'all cute, you are two emotional orphans that found each other and fell in love.
Wow.
But what that means, it doesn't mean that we didn't have great parents that meant well, that gave everything they had. So I want to honor them. And we do. We dedicate the book to the four of them, both married over 50 years. But we do bring origin stuff into a relationship, two different people and two ways of functioning and operating and two codependent like versions of dancing, that we saw in our parents. And both of our parents were born in the silent generation, like their parents were, products of war and victim, like it was like the Great Depression. It was awful. So of course they weren't talking about like, let's talk about our feelings. It was more about like, what's survival? What food are we putting on the table? How are we getting through this? How do we have heat? So things like that were very different. But I think for us, because I might've been more verbal with my feelings, it didn't mean that I was more healthy. I just think I got more aggressive with my tone and my tongue. I was more cutting, as you can tell. Like God gave me a gift of communication, and that can be used for good or for harm. And so I would sometimes like run like.
Yeah, I'd be overwhelmed because she had such mastery of what she was feeling, what was happening in the moment. It was way deeper than I was able to think through it. And this is years into our marriage as she had grown in her own emotional health journey. But I felt overwhelmed, intimidated.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to say. Like, you're right. It sounds like you're right. I don't have a good comeback. It doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And I had built a case that he couldn't win, and I think that happens for a lot of women.
Be a great lawyer.
Like we've asked men, like, what do you long for most? And we did this more recently, and you could speak to this too, but most of the men, we just really want our wives to be happy.
Yes.
We like what we long for more than anything is for her to be happy and not complaining all the time. And so that seems so simple and basic, but women are just like razor sharp on like pointing out your mistakes.
What's wrong?
Yeah.
Boy, there's a lot of directions I could go. Anything else on sex? Do you have any recommendations, any prescriptions for couples, any questions they should ask? Yeah,
I think there's kind of this other movement happening now. There's a lot of sexless marriages.
Yeah.
And I think people don't know where to go with that.
Scott Galloway talks about raising a sexless generation, that Gen Z is becoming asexual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we believe sex is incredible, and we have incredible sex. And I think God's given us all this gift in our marriage to explore one another and our bodies and enjoy it, and it's beautiful. And I think for men, there is an emotional connection that happens during sexual intimacy that's very strong for men, that I'm not saying it's not there for women, but I think sometimes that's why I was looking at sex as my emotional and like it was enough. And then I realized it wasn't enough, but there is something there for men. But I think for women, what I've learned is, sex is obviously something that's happening all day long, because it's not orgasm and just having the act of sex. It's actually foreplay, it's conversation, it's being attentive. Yeah, like showing attention to your spouse, especially to my wife, all the time, not just because I'm transacting for sex or doing these things because I want to have sex later. We have to develop rhythms that feel natural, I think, for men that help our wives feel that kind of love and cherished care. And that creates an environment where sex is maybe going to happen, maybe not. It's not going to ruin your night if it doesn't. But you've created an environment where if it naturally is going to happen, then you're ready for it, and it's been a great day, and you're in a good place for it.
I would counsel young, mid, however long you've been married, it doesn't even matter. If there's anything that's happened in your fantasies, in your past, before you met each other, after you met each other, anything you've observed, saw online, engaged, just tell each other. Just tell each other.
You've had those conversations?
Absolutely. Withhold nothing, especially around that topic, because the enemy dwells in the secret, and all he wants to do is shame makes you hide and run, and you cannot actually have the communion that God calls marriage to be if there's anything lurking. You can't. I remember waking up one time from a speaking event, and I had anxiety, and I called him at 3 a.m, and I go, I feel anxiety, and I feel like the Lord is asking me to just confess something to you. And it really was just still like, there are lingering things that sometimes will make a mind wander during sex, whether it's you or me or anyone. And if that even surfaces for a second, I want to repent. I want to tell you, I want to go like, I don't want to have anything on my mind outside of you. The more honest we can just be about this stuff and stop getting weird, I think the healthier that we're going to have. I want Christians to be having the best sex, not the other way around. Yeah. Like, why is the world having, transactional sex, but for them at least it's free because they don't wallow in shame. If Christians could just get honest, the truth sets you free. And ever since we've just said, like, withhold nothing. Like, if I'm gone for a while and you feel like you miss me and you're like, just call me, like, let's just make sure we withhold nothing from one another in any area of life, but especially that one if we want it to be one that's pure and true and lovely and good. And since then, it's been the better sex. It has, because we know everything about each other. And there are a lot of marriages that don't feel the freedom for that to happen. So I know that's A to Z quickly. We didn't get there overnight, took a couple decades. But once you start, and I would counsel, if someone does come to you after this podcast and starts just telling you everything, I would counsel you to just hold space and be grateful that they were willing. Do not condemn, do not twist and manipulate that to use it as a power play. Yeah. Know that we are all broken and desperate need of a Savior, and this is actually like an olive branch to continue to heal and repair something that God might really bless in an abundant way.
Yeah, that confession piece, I think, in our marriage on every front has been huge, and it's been the key to healing. It's just the ability to come to one another without shame and be able to say, anything we've done, anything we felt, any old resentment that we've held on to, that could turn into contempt, because, contempt is what they would describe as the marriage killer. Like, if you let these unforgiven resentments build up and you make the case against your spouse and you believe actually you're better than them, and the reason there's any trouble in your marriage is it really is them. And that's a lie the enemy wants each of us to agree with, and many of us do quickly. But that contempt, when you start to believe you're better than the other person, that leads to the marriage ending. And so I'd say to anybody listening that's going, hey, I do feel that for my spouse. Like, I feel like I'm better than them. Then it's a warning to you to stop, to pause, to go to God, to say, God, help me see where this built from. What's the roots of it? What's the foundation of it? How do I get healing myself in that? And how do we process that together so that we can heal, so this doesn't go down the path where we end in divorce?
The last thing I'll say, because this is also a part of the telling, like, nothing withheld from one another, is if you notice, like, someone of the opposite sex is, like, flattering you, giving you extra attention, you're not reciprocating, but you're noticing it, you're observing it, do you feel flattered by it? There's, like, lingering this, that, or the other. This is, like, early on, right? I would just go ahead and nip that in the bud with your spouse and go, hey, I notice, like, at the gym, whoever just kind of, like, makes conversation. Or you might say, like, I noticed this or that, and we're just way out ahead of it. We've just put in too many years to just, like, act like that's inconsequential. Yeah. And we're not even saying that person intended it. If we noticed it and we felt flattery from it, then we need to just
could be 100% on you.
Could be on us. Yeah.
Is there anything you should not tell your spouse?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah. I think we have found the more we share everything, even if it's something you think, well, they're going to be mad that I felt that, or this is divorce.
Yeah.
We have found that's where the healing begins, and it's just not worth it. It's never been worth it for us to withhold. Now, I could credit Rebekah for that. I mean, she's created a space where we talk about this a lot, and therefore I feel freedom to tell her something that maybe for some other person that's not in that same emotional space, they use it as cause for, like, oh, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
If you had a fantasy
how did
about—
you do that? How did you create space?
I think it's gradual, right? You build trust over time. And we've done this with our kids all around the same time that we started to do this with our kids, talking about sex, because they had a lot of questions. Of course, they can go to Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. But we're like, no, we want to just know, we're going to create a culture in our home where no topic is off limits. So if you're exposed to something, our friend is doing something, you hear of a friend's doing something. And so I found like for a season when the kids were in high school, we were talking about sex all the time. And they were like, ooh, gross, mom. But it was almost like, I'll just say just enough so that you're not curious to go elsewhere. And the freedom of that became freedom of them just asking us. And we're like, we're not giving you details, obviously, because that's inappropriate. But we're not going to act weird about something that God made for the flourishing of humanity. So I think it just to put like the pin in the balloon that's like stop the weird stigma that this is dirty, but more that like under God's keeping and care with honesty and truth and vulnerability, it's actually the most sacred, beautiful thing. And so it just made it a lot easier that way.
I think you mentioned a couple of times, if you have a fantasy about, I want you to finish that sentence.
Yeah, well, I think, because Rebekah referenced that earlier, but even a husband that has a fantasy about another woman, at some point, even if they're having sex and they're fantasizing while having sex, that's something to confess. Yeah. Like again, a woman could react horribly to that. But I think we have found in our relationship to confess even at that level gives us a freedom and gives us a freedom from doing that.
Well, it just goes back to the words of Jesus. Even if you think it in your heart, right? Even if you look at a woman and think it in your heart, that's adultery. Mm-hmm. So do we believe that or not? Because, I mean, it's kind of like there are parts of the Bible that are like, ugh. And yet, if you really play him out, all he's after is the heart. He's after the purity of heart. We could actually, the outside could look real clean, like maybe it's an emotional affair, or maybe it's just flirtation. Maybe we glanced at something online, but nobody knows, right? So the outside still looks pretty clean. Like we come home, we do the duty, we're obligated to one another. We're going to stay together, come hell or high water. We don't really like each other. Or if the heart is pure, right? If our heart is like, search me, oh God, know my heart. Test me, know my anxious thoughts in Psalm 139. See if there's anything wicked in me. He calls it wicked, and lead me in the way everlasting. And that was David, God's bestie. So if he's capable of that, and we know his story, then why would we act superior to that? Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about fighting about everything. We've talked about being totally transparent and honest in sex. That would end most marriages. I'm just going to say that. Yeah. If you look at, I guess I probably have a bit of an inside scoop because my wife practiced family law, et cetera. But you hear these stories. There are people getting divorced right now as we sit down and have this conversation for lesser grounds or exactly the same thing. So what I want to know is, you're still together and deeply in love.
More than ever.
More than ever.
Yes.
Yeah. And that is possible. It's really hard. I feel more deeply in love with my wife after 35 years than I did 10 years in. Why did you stay together? How did you stay together?
Well, like you said, if someone were to confess one of those things, like I could have said that to Gabe, like I thought about this, or visualize this person or whatever. If he would have been like, I'm so insulted and offended because I've never done anything like that. Well, that wouldn't be true for starters. Mm-hmm. But instead he was like, hey, it's great. It's fine. Like, I know, like the fact that I'm like repentant, coming to you going, God convicted me of this. Like I'm initiating this. Most things that happen sexually in marriages are found out. They're caught. Then it only happened one time. Usually, there's always this backpedaling and self-defense that never repairs. It just continues like, okay, fine, we won't rock the boat because finances need to be stable and the kids need stable. Right. But we're not about like maintaining a crippled marriage. We are about a resurrected life. And a resurrected life, if we think the cross is beyond like whatever might come out from the secret, it's not. It's for that. The cross is for us to put it all the chips in the middle of the table and go, Jesus, we are desperate for you. Our marriage will not survive without you. And it has to be mutual. If I were to feel that and he was like, no, I'm out, then that's his choice. He can decide. But the Lord still has covenant keeping things in the scriptures. So then, there's sometimes men coming around men going, what are you doing? Like, look at you. Like, none of us are perfect. When we both humble ourselves and we're both willing to go toward repair, then God can work with that.
Yeah, and I think so how we've done it is a deep honesty with each other that's produced a freedom that we both enjoy today that we didn't enjoy a decade ago. So that's been a journey
And a deep humility in our own stuff, right? Our own ownership.
And then community's been a huge part of our relationship, and friends that have been willing to be in our life that we could go to with these things. So it would have been early in our marriage where we had other couples that were just a year or two or more in front of us that would say, hey, you're having fights, like that's normal. Every couple walks through these things. Like you don't need to get divorced. It's not that you're just incompatible. And I think having these other voices throughout our journey, like Rebekah mentioned, several counselors, we've invested time in intensives where we've gone and spent 3 days with this one couple, 2 days with this counselor. So all those things have been part of that journey for us. It's been good books along the way, but we couldn't have done it just on our own. We've had to look to other guides and other people who've walked through some of these things to help us know that it was possible, to have an imagination that this could happen. And I think all along we've said, we know our marriage could be better. We know there's more there. Like, let's just keep leaning into it. I know this is hard. It's frustrating. It'd be easier to just stop and settle with where we're at and just be dissatisfied, which is where I think most people sit. Yeah. They're just dissatisfied.
Or you end up being business partners, friends, roommates.
Yeah, you find another way to do it, and then you rely on other outside relationships or porn or any other way to try to fulfill these parts of your marriage. Like, my wife or my husband is never going to be able to meet that for me. And I think that's the lie from the enemy. I think it's easy to believe it. There's a lot of reasons to believe it. And yet God's wanting us to confront that, to realize that this is a lie. That's not true. That's not what I have for you in intimacy and in marriage. And that's been key for us, but it's critical that there's been other couples.
What's your advice? Because you said something that came up a lot. When I pastored a church for 20 years, I would often talk to one of the spouses, and they would say, well, I'm willing, but my husband. I'm willing, but my wife. And people watching this right now, listening to this right now, might be like, well, I'm there, but you don't know my spouse. Do you have any thoughts or advice in a situation like that?
Yes, we have a lot of those people in our lives right now that we love dearly. And it's heartbreaking, right? Because it sometimes feels like one party's ready when the other one's not. And then there's a switcheroo. It's like the timing never quite lines up. God's bigger than that. You know, obviously we are always coming around whoever is willing in prayer and laying hands and like just interceding with them, that Jesus would continue to plead on their behalf, that the Holy Spirit would plead on their behalf. But also, knowing that while I can't change Gabe's heart, that is the Holy Spirit's work, I can change me. I can change my ingredients to the recipe. I can change and that's almost where there's disruption coming in marriages, is when one person really starts to get honest with their pain and their confession and their repentance, and they're changing and they're getting in the Word and they're inviting accountability. All of a sudden they're like growing and they want the fullness. That almost ruptures the relationship because the dysfunctional dance is done. And the other person, the codependent relationship, does not know what to do. So yes, we still love the one that's not ready or doesn't want repair or is ready to walk. But we're just kind of continually, if you have community in that space, to keep coming around that person, knowing that one, your change will impact the other person, maybe not right away. It might push them away initially, but there's a steadfast agency that you've taken with healing that is appealing. They are curious about it because you no longer are holding them accountable or holding them ransom to be your rescuer or savior. You have found that codependency with God instead.
Yeah, and I think we've learned that the only thing we could take responsibility for is ourself. Like, we can't change our spouse. I'm never going to change Rebekah by quoting to her beautiful quotes. I'm not going to change her by handing her a book. Like, it's just not going to happen that way. It's largely going to happen when she sees my own growth. God gets a hold of her heart, and then there can be some new conversations that happen. But that's the importance of committing to covenant. It's going, I'm in this, just like I spoke to in our vows, like, I'm not going anywhere. And in this culture today, that's a hard thing for people to say.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere. And I think we need more men to step into that, to say, I'm not going anywhere, to their wives. So there's a security that can attach, that there's a belief that the spouse can have, like, oh, they're not going anywhere. Like, I'm going to lean in versus lean out to my girlfriends or to my guy friends and try to find excuse and reason for me to walk away. And so for us, I think that's been a big part of the core commitment, is like, we've both been committed. Like, we're not going to go anywhere. Even if we ever felt like we should or would.
Wanted to.
Want to. there's that commitment there. And I think there's an unhealthy way to do that, to where we see marriages that just go forever and they live avoidant lives and silent marriages.
Avoidant lives, yeah.
But I think our commitment has been, we're not going anywhere because we're going to stay committed to working. And we're going to never think we've arrived at what a beautiful, perfect marriage is.
We have four dances in the book, in the dysfunctional dance chapter: silent, intense, avoidant, and anxious. And avoidant, the difference between that and silent, avoidant is you just change the subject so that you never really have to have conflict. Whereas the silent is the hurt is so deep and has gone for so long and been left unsaid that the resentment and the contempt is already there. There's stonewalling. It's like it's absent. And so when you say, hey, if people started telling the truth, the marriages would be over, I'm like, the marriage essentially is over in the way that God they are now roommates or business partners. They're co-parenting, whatever they are. So we're just going like, if it's already over and you still are going to stay under one roof, why not get honest?
Yes.
Why not? Why not just try and go, hey, can we need a third party, a referee? Sure. But like, could we broach scratching the surface, because there's going to be something on the other side of this?
Silent, intense,
avoidant, and anxious.
Yeah, there's these dances. We have found these 4 dances are happening in most marriages. And sometimes that changes depending on the season. But if you can identify what's the dance we're doing, ours is an intense one.
Yeah.
We have an intense dance that we tend to do with each other.
Because you'll say the things that hurt and wound. And,
And then we'll, have makeup sex, but it really didn't work, right? Like some people are really just passionate people. They fuel each other, but then they never fully repair in the right way.
What is anxious?
Anxious is this need. I need you to be okay so I can be okay. And I need you to be home at a certain time so I can be okay. And I need stability with finances. And yes, we do need provision. But all of a sudden, the codependency is when we latch on to someone other than God for our source, our strength, our sustenance. And so that anxious one, I think, and for you, it's just like, whatever it is that kind of gets you a little bit. How would you answer the anxious one? Yeah.
That's not what I feel as much for us. Yeah. But I think for couples that feel that, I think a lot of husbands would report to me, hey, my wife is constantly unsettled, constantly the complaining things happening a lot. And they would tie it back to she's anxious. Like she's not feeling settled in who she is outside of me. She's not feeling at peace with our situation and never has. It feels like since I've known them, since we've been married, this has come up a lot. And they start to identify, that's what's going on.
When you said anxious, a lot of faces popped into my mind of marriages. I think there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of, I need you to do this so I can feel this, etc. What are, it's very common and I know you're not like this, okay?
Oh.
But it's very common in Christian circles to be like, well, we've been married 28 years. All our struggles are in the rearview mirror. And now we're living happily ever after, skipping into the sunset together, hand in hand. What are your current struggles?
Launching kids. I would just say like a fight we had Christmas Eve. So that's
that's a good time to have a fight.
As in not like a few years ago Christmas Eve, but the most recent Christmas Eve was just my anxiety of like all our college kids coming back home, and we have found a rhythm now as empty nesters, and then they come back home and everyone kind of jumps back into their origin story roles. Yes. And it's like, you were so independent at college, and now that we're back home, all of a sudden I'm mothering again, So things came to a head, and I had one of my bigger meltdowns that I've had in the last couple of years.
Privately, publicly?
Publicly, then ran to the closet and then finished privately. And so it showed me that, wow, God, you have done a lot of work, but there's more. And I'm so thankful to have the freedom and not shame to say that out loud so that I could come back. I first apologized to Gabe, and then we both, I apologized to it happened in front of my adult children too. So it's like, trust me, the Lord will continue to use ways to humble us into eternity. But that was needed and important. And I think the more we can own those things faster, that's what we are learning, is that while those things may still happen, we repair a lot faster.
Our apologies come so quick now.
So much quicker.
Like within minutes?
An hour. Yeah, max. That was a meltdown, and that still took me an hour.
But early in marriage, that would have been 2-3 days of hanging on to something, of never
You're
working
wrong.
through it.
I was right.
And I think,
and then condemning ourselves in the meantime while we're waiting to repair. That's the worst. And it's like we start the problem, the enemy just finishes up. He's like, we give him an open runway to be like, just continue to pile on about how terrible I am as a human.
yeah, one of our principles is to apologize first. And whoever apologizes first wins. So be on the hunt. Like if there's a moment that erupts, there's probably something you contributed to that. Even if you I'm sure it's Rebekah's fault. She's the one that brought this up. I usually try to think through now, like, what did I do there? Like, how did I amplify it? How did I not respond well? How did I not really listen to what she was saying? And that takes a little work and a little effort, but we have found the repair happening quick just leaves no room for these deeper fissures to like form into something more concrete.
What's a current struggle for you?
I think our schedules as we look at the future, there's so many, and you know this, Carey, too. It's like there's so many opportunities that all look great, think trips to take together or conferences to attend or speaking engagements. And I think we tend to have a hard time like working through a year out. What is saying yes to this going to mean? Mm-hmm. And how's this going to impact what we're feeling next February? Because it's so far away. It's like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, hey, and the calendar is blank.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we've gotten a lot better at it. But I think that's one of those as we look to the future now that we're in a new season where our kids are adults, like we're trying to form what do we want our rhythm of life to be like? And what kind of boundaries should we put around that? And anytime we have that conversation, it's gotten better, but it's always been one that's a bit of tense conversation because, you're trying to respond to what's God doing here, but we don't want to blame God for just being busy. Mm-hmm. And yet we want to be sensitive to those moves. And so I wouldn't call it a big conflict as much as it's created a new opportunity for us to kind of reset. What are our plans and how are we going to do this as we move into this season? Even with like a marriage book, because a lot of people invite us to do things together, but we have 2 children with special needs at home, and we can't we don't both go often to do things together. And so that means there's a lot of saying no to things that would have been great to do, or trying to navigate like, okay, how do we help do this together,
Yeah. Our counselor cautioned us about 5 years ago. He said, because we were very volatile in that moment of like all the things we were trying to do. And he said, it's like you bit off a 10-pound cheeseburger and you're trying not to choke on it. Like he said, I don't see divorce in your future because of infidelity. If there were any option for you guys to leave or drift, it would be because you said yes to too many good things. Wow. And that was like, wow. So I think that's our ultimate challenge as Christ followers. Those who are on the front lines of ministry, who are hard charging and feel both mutually called and love the work, you can lose each other in the work. The drift is so subtle. Mm-hmm. And we were doing this, and then our friends encouraged us to go and doing this. And so we made proactive choices to co-host our podcast, to co-host these retreats, to co-host these intensives. Not because we had to or needed to, but because we knew that we needed something to keep us tethered to one another.
I'll tell you, this has been a gift. There is a lot in this conversation. There's even more in the book. Do you have a copy of the book? Do we have that somewhere?
We have an arc. We have an arc.
You have an arc. All right,
yes.
We'll take an arc because it's a cool cover. It's called Fight for Us.
Yes,
there it is.
Yes.
Lions and Lions.
Lions and Lions.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's awesome. So the book is out now or about now when this airs. And anything else you want to tell people watching, people listening?
I have one thing. Okay, so there's a lot in Gen Z. So our work, we serve the next generation. We love their zeal and we love their passion. We love their fire for God. It's just our kids are in that generation. Yeah. Like we're so proximate to it. One thing I'm finding in that generation, especially regarding counsel in marriage, is there are a lot of unprepared counsel advice givers with platforms on TikTok that can tell you how to have a great marriage. And they are either single or they've been married for 3 minutes. And so I would just counsel you to go to your pastor, your local person who's your mentor, people who disciple you, who know you, who've done your premarital counseling. Maybe you're dating with the intent to marry. Go to people in your actual life who are older than you that might have a little gray, that crown of wisdom. Zeal and wisdom was meant to be paired together. And so that generational handoff is very important. We want to give, to the people coming behind us what we didn't fully get. We kind of found it in books and different counselors throughout our whole marriage, but we would not be where we are without sound counsel, holding us accountable, biblical counsel that was for the marriage, not just for the individual, but for the marriage.
Yeah, that's an important caution. A lot of counselors today are trained not in marriage and family, but in individual therapy.
Right.
But the questions that are coming up in those sessions deal with marriage, and they find themselves sometimes counseling that individual in a direction that actually leads them away from the marriage.
Because they get one side of the story.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And so I would caution couples.
Spouse sounds like a beast.
They really need to have counsel in their life, committed to the marriage. And I wouldn't be listening to anybody that's not committed to a covenant marriage, because I'm not sure the advice you're going to get is going to lead to that marriage getting healthier.
Yeah. Whew. Could have gone Rogan on this, like 3 hours. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Really
so much.
appreciate it.
Thanks,
Congrats on the new book. It's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you, Carey. Grateful for you.
Thank you.